that's synchronous, meaning even though we're on camera right now, we're going to miss some nonverbal cues. You can't translate everything in person to a camera. However, there's much more being communicated between you and I right now because it's ideally our internet is running well and we're somewhat in real time. And that in real time piece is so important because if our nonverbals are in real time, it's actually calming to us inherently in our nervous system to get the nods or the questions of the heads. We rely on that feedback so much for our own calming of our nervous system.
It's Dr. Jeff Myers. This is the Truth Changes Everything podcast. Every week, I get to call up people who I think have answers to really pressing questions and just get their wise counsel. And today we're going to focus on the issue that we all have dealt with, especially since COVID, which is anxiety. It's become one of the defining struggles of our day. We worry about our future, our relationships, our finances, our health, even our faith. But what happens when anxiety becomes more than just an occasional struggle and it actually starts shaping the way we think and feel and live? Well, then it's not just a social issue, it's a worldview issue, isn't it? And for Christians, the challenge sometimes is even more complicated because we know intellectually that we shouldn't feel anxious, but we still worry and we still have fear, we still wrestle with it. So, is this a spiritual problem, a psychological problem, something more complex? And today, to help us walk through this, we have a licensed mental health counselor, author, and ministry leader named Melissa Fisher. She's written this book. It's really cool. It's an 8-week process you can go through to help undergird your biblical understanding so that you can deal with anxiety. It's called Jesus for the Anxious. How cool is that? Jesus for the Anxious. Melissa's passionate about helping people, especially young adults, experience healing, peace, and a deeper connection with Christ. And we're going to specifically talk about how we do this at Summit Ministries to help young adults who are in this in a time of anxiety. So please welcome Melissa Fisher to the Truth Changes Everything podcast. Melissa Fisher, welcome to the Truth Changes Everything podcast.
Thank you, Dr. Myers. It's great to be here.
You've got this brand new project. And it's so timely, called Jesus for the Anxious. And that's what we get to talk about today because anxiety seems to be everywhere. Even committed Christians. Well, Jesus tells us all the time, don't be anxious. Don't be worrying about what you're going to eat or drink or wear because your heavenly Father knows you need all of these things and he will take care of them. But we still struggle. And I'm just really looking forward to the conversation, hearing from you, sharing some of the things that we've been doing at Summit Ministries to help students who feel anxious as well. But I'm just really curious from your perspective, both as a therapist and as someone who you shared your journey about your struggle with anxiety. What are you seeing in the culture right now?
Well, I think I'm seeing what everybody else is seeing. I think I'm seeing an increase in overall anxiety, and it looks different for everyone. And so for some, it looks like stress and hypervigilance or an increase maybe in physical symptoms. And then for others, it can actually look like shutting down and withdrawing. And so I don't think anything I'm saying is a shock to anyone who's going to hear this. It's becoming more prevalent. And so it's time to address these issues that we've got, and we're going to do that.
It seems like there's kind of a baseline level of anxiety that's much higher than it used to be. Do you observe that?
I think so. And I think some of it comes from I'm going to pinpoint kind of two points in recent history that I see as bigger triggers. Recent meaning the last 20 years. One being the introduction of smartphones and social media, and the other being the shutdowns that happened with the pandemic, in particular the shutdowns. And so I think those two things really influenced, especially when you start with the smartphones and the social media. So you have an increase in a person's ability to so-called connect, which isn't really connecting.
Right.
And there's a lot of research behind how that's actually isolating for us to have this asynchronous communication. that asynchronous communication actually causes depression and anxiety symptoms. And then you tack on, a dozen or so years later where you have these shutdowns happen, which is isolation. And so I think those two things in particular contribute to some of the stuff, but I think it goes way further back into a lot of just the introduction of post-industrial revolution, where we just created this work produce culture that is constant go 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 go. So I'm speaking more specifically to American culture there,
Hmm.
of becoming much more active, and none of us are surprised by that either. We all understand that, we live in it, we've heard the stories and the podcasts and the books and blogs about it and the posts. But I think stepping back and recognizing it has a much bigger impact than we realize, and all of those things really contribute to the levels of anxiety and the widespread anxiety that we see today.
Yeah, I'm wondering about the go 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 culture. I've been to countries of the world that are faster paced than America. A lot of countries in Asia, several countries in Africa, at least from my experience. I mean, from the time you hit the ground, man, you're running, and they go 14, 16 hours a day. But they don't, at least in some of those countries in Africa, they didn't, even though they were super fast paced and you were working really hard, it didn't seem to have the same level of anxiousness. And maybe it's just my misapprehension of what was happening, but it seemed like people were busy and active and hardworking, but they weren't frustrated by anxiety as much.
So I'm less familiar with African cultures, and there's many there. I say that as if it's one
Yeah.
culture, than I am some of the others. But here's my question for you: when you say "go go go" in one of these locations you're talking about, what do you mean by that? What were they doing as they were going? What were they doing throughout their days?
Well, I was there speaking, and
Mm-hmm.
so we just went from one event to another, one group to another. They felt like we only have you on the ground for a certain period of time, so we want to get the most out of it. So we had a super active schedule. But my sense, the people I was with were people who rose before dawn every day and went to bed very late. When I had a trip to Korea, that was a similar thing, and I just thought I can't wait to get on the airplane so I can finally sleep for a minute, because
Uh-huh. So
four
even the
hours a
people
night is
living
not enough.
there.
Yeah,
Okay. Okay. Yeah.
yeah.
How did they do rest?
I don't know. I think they did rest by fellowship more than anything, I would say. And different. I remember one place in Africa that I was, and people were dancing, or they would have singing as part of what they were doing. There was something
Mhm.
where they were together. Their rest wasn't necessarily sleep.
Hmm. Hmm. So there's community involved in that.
I
And if you
think
think
so.
about what community does for our brains, what it does for our spirit, and how it feeds us in ways that I'll use the word isolation, but being alone can't feed us. And there are so many things we can't recreate that come directly from having community. There's so many things in the way that our body and our brains react to having a conversation with another human being, or sharing laughter with another human being, or sharing dancing with another human being, that we can't recreate in any other space. And so I wonder, I don't know these spaces that you're in, but I wonder what their time outside of that work looked like, because our time outside of our work significantly impacts how much our work impacts us. And
Hmm.
so I think that it would be worth stepping back, and looking at those dynamics in their cultures and seeing how they spent that other time.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about it from that perspective. I knew it was busy, but it didn't seem as frenetic, I suppose.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder
Mm-hmm.
if that relates to what you said earlier. It's a comment that I really want to have you amplify a little bit. Asynchronous communication creates more anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us what
Mm-hmm.
you mean by that.
Yeah. So we um we are designed by this triune God, right? And I mentioned in this book, I don't get it. I don't understand how he's triune God. I just know that he is. It's one of those things
Yeah.
my 2.5 pound brain will never actually understand on this earth. Uh, but we know that he is, and we know we're created in his image. So, and all the other things that means. One of the things that it means is that we're designed to be in community with other humans, right? And with God. And so a part of that is as we interact with other human beings, that's synchronous, meaning even though we're on camera right now, we're going to miss some nonverbal cues. You can't translate everything in person to a camera. However, there's much more being communicated between you and I right now because it's ideally our internet is running well and we're somewhat in real time. And that in real time piece is so important because if our nonverbals are in real time, it's actually calming to us inherently in our nervous system to get the nods or the questions of the heads. We rely on that feedback so much for our own calming of our nervous system.
Wow.
And when that's not in real time, it actually disrupts our nervous system. And so it's the three dots after you've sent a text. Right?
Oh, yeah.
And so you send the text and you see that they have the three dots and they're getting ready to reply. And that three dots can take a second and it can take days because they forgot they were replying to you and walked away from their phone. And the moment I tell people about the three dots, we all go, ooh.
Yeah.
Right? It's immediately we're like, ooh, we don't like that. And that's, if you think about what that oof really means internally with your nervous system, it's a disruption, right? It's an angst, even though it's not a level 10 panic attack angst, hopefully. It's still an angst. And so that asynchronous, that lack of true feedback in the moment of is disruptive to our nervous system. So things like social media and text really don't help because what we're seeking in that moment is real connection. And we're actually getting something that causes us to be more withdrawn or more dysregulated.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I ever really considered that before. That, when I was a kid, I played around with CB radios. I don't know if anybody who's watching or listening remembers what those were. It was kind of a big deal, and I had one. I had one in my room, and I could talk to people. I could talk to truckers going by on the highway, and so forth. And it was not in person, but
Mm-hmm.
it was synchronous.
Mm-hmm.
And so even then, the technology was being used in a very different way from the way
Mm-hmm.
we often use technology today.
Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
don't know
Even
very
then it
many
was synchronous.
students I work with who use their phone for phone calls.
Yeah, it's interesting to watch, especially the Gen Z generation really struggle to pick up the phone, actually pick up the phone like we used to, pick up a phone, a cell phone, and actually make a phone call on it. They're very uncomfortable with that.
Hmm. All right. Well, this is so good. I'd love to hear a little bit of your story. You share this in the book uh, because I think this, you're a therapist. You're helping people with anxiety issues, but you're doing it with a heart of knowing what they're going through. Can you share a little
Mhm.
of your story?
Yeah, yeah. So as I got older and looked back, I realized my anxiety started much younger than I than I initially realized. And it wasn't until I was in my graduate program for my master's degree for counseling that it came to a head, and I started having panic attacks in the middle of the night, sometimes during the day, mostly at night. And it just seemed like I could fret over everything and nothing all in the same moment.
Mm.
And I really questioned, oh shoot, do can I be a therapist when I have my own issues?
Oh,
And I think I had idolized this idea that, of course, therapists, don't have problems. That's not true.
oh,
Anybody who's watching, being a therapist does not make you immune to life's issues. That's unfortunate, but it's the truth. And so having to wrestle through that myself and get my own help, and even getting my own help wasn't the end of that. I got some of my own help. It was pretty good, but then as I started learning more and really seeking through all of my courses and then in my student counseling, as much as I was there for them, I was also learning at that time, right? You're a
mm.
student counselor, so you're doing a bit of both. And it was so informative to me to watch my clients go through these processes and to see some similarities between them, to see some differences between them, and recognize that anxiety was a lot bigger and more complex than I first realized. That as much as I wanted to deny the importance of, say, like attachment theory and childhood issues on a person's life, I had to address some of that and recognize that my past essentially impacted my present. And so a lot of the learning even came after those early days of recognizing the anxiety. And I think what it did is it helped me to really be able to understand when someone comes to my office and they are just overwhelmed, panicked, everything is going awry. Their ability to comprehend is very low. And I now know why scientifically why that happens. I understand that some of the neuroscience behind it, but I also get it. I know what it's like to be so overwhelmed that you can't form a rational thought. I wouldn't be speaking like this in my most anxious moments because I couldn't.
Yeah.
And I think it does what it does for any of us is we gain compassion for those where we've been in their shoes, even just a little bit. And recognizing that I'm not fully in their shoes. I don't know everything they're going through. And my anxiety could look very different from theirs. But I'm not coming from a place of, let me just guide you. And here's what I've read. It's yeah, this sucks.
Yeah.
Let's find some ways to work through this.
Talk about the neuroscience for a moment. That's helpful for a lot of people to understand that what's happening is your physiological response to the circumstances. And it gives, for me, it gives me a sense of compassion for myself and for other people when I know what's taking place there.
It's not a fleeting thing that we're just imagining. Yes. So with emotions in particular, or in a general sense, emotions aren't fleeting things. They're actually chemical electrical reactions in the brain. And so research has shown that, like, if we do some scans of the brain and we trigger a particular, they've used images to trigger particular emotions, anger, happiness, sadness, and the same areas of the brain will light up for a variety of people based on the certain emotions. And so you'll get particular parts of the brain that light up for happiness, particular ones that light up for sadness, particular ones that light up for anger or for fear, and there's some overlapping in there, meaning sometimes it's one part of the brain will light up for two different emotions, but then there also will be differences of other parts of the brain. And that's important because when I say the words light up, what I really mean is they're measuring and they're looking at chemical electrical reactions in the brain. And I think it's important to recognize because what it does is it reminds us that the emotion is real, even if the information it's based off of is not. So for example, if someone were to run into this room that I'm in right now and tell me that someone really significant to me just died, I would freak out. I would go to panic. I'd probably hang up this call, right? And I would say, okay, like there's something we need to do. What's going on? What happened? And then if we found out all of a sudden that information was totally false, I can't just turn off the emotions I just felt because they were real. They're actually happening in my body and brain. In fact, in a perfectly healthy brain, when all of that nervous system, the sympathetic nervous system, the fight or flight is triggered, if the information that you have eventually dulls out, numbs out, or becomes moot, right? It's like the null factor in research, right? It's no longer valid. Even when we find out the information is not true, that we thought was true, that triggered that anxiety, it still takes, I think I read, is about 2 to 3 minutes for our entire nervous system to recoup.
Wow.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's just from a stress thing. That's not even from a trauma thing. That's just from a stress. A car goes past you on the side of the road really fast. There's two signals that your brain gets. The first one is to all of the autonomic parts, the parts you can't necessarily control, the parts that just react. So you get tense, the blood in your extremities draws in, it goes into your core because it needs to protect this. It's trying to protect you in that moment. And in order to do so, it has to take the blood from less important parts of your body. I can live without a hand. I can't live without my core. Right. And so it's vasoconstriction, stuff like that. But the second signal it sends is to this cortex part that has the thoughts where the brain goes, oh, I'm not in danger. The car was too close, but I'm fine. But all of that other reaction already started. You didn't get a choice. And so that has to reset. And so those emotions happen. And so if someone comes in my room and they're in stress and they're sitting on my couch and they've been in stress for days and months and years, that means their nervous system, their sympathetic nervous system, that fight or flight, which goes on to flee and freeze and fawn and all the other ones that we've added, that has been in an on state for that long. And so it's going to take some time for that to calm down.
That is really so helpful to understand because I find myself thinking, why can't I calm down from that? It wasn't a real threat, or it's over. There's nothing more I can do about it. And I'm usually a pretty calm person, but still it's that buzzing inside my head that just doesn't shut down. It's so helpful to know that that's okay. That's normal.
Congrats, you're human.
Yeah.
Welcome.
Oh, I'd love to, as you went through this and thinking about it biblically, we know there are a lot of scriptures that tell us to not be anxious. But what is it that's so hard? I could read that scripture. I've memorized the Sermon on the Mount. I could recite for you what Jesus said about not being anxious, but I still struggle with anxiety. Is there, help me understand what's going on there.
I think when God puts something in the Bible over and over again, there's a reason.
Yes.
Right? And so I think if we read quite a few verses about not being anxious, I think God knows we're going to be anxious. I think he's trying to give us a heads up, and that we don't need to be. He's asking us not to be. He's telling us not to be, but he's also giving us some guidance in that. When I read, especially Paul, I mean, Paul went through so much that none of us will, I think, ever understand. And, his chapters or his verses in Philippians about not being anxious, it comes on the heels of a man who's been through a lot, who understands anxiety, and I think he understood depression. I'm reading 2 Corinthians. It's like this guy was, broken down to the point of death. Like something's really broken in his world, and he's living with that. And so, reading these verses about anxiety from him in particular, I'm thinking, okay, Paul's giving me some advice here. And even Jesus is trying to give us some perspective. And so each time I think we're reading a verse on anxiety, it's anytime we're reading God's word, right? It's giving it context, not giving it context. It's reading the context around it.
Yes.
And when we do that, we see sometimes it's perspective, sometimes it's advice, sometimes it's warning, right? And so the hard part is that we read verses like don't be, such as don't be anxious, or don't be, such as don't be angry. And for some reason in our brain, we interpret that into it's sinful, you should feel shame, and you should just confess and move on. But even in terms of sin, that's not all God's asking us to do. The word repent actually means to turn, right? And so even if there's sin, we still have to turn, which doesn't mean do nothing and forget it. It means do something else. And so I think the concept is same for emotions. It's, or, managing emotions. It's let's do something different. Let's think differently. Let's do differently. Let's relate differently.
Okay. Yeah, and that's why people are going to want to get a hold of your work, because the 8-week journey that you take them on is going to help them through that process. How to put your thoughts and your emotions, your brain state, your personal circumstances, change the things that you can, and so forth. It's going to be super helpful. I'd love to hear you talk about some of the things that you see in the culture that are supposed to help us with anxiety. So I'll just give you the example. Our ministry, Summit Ministries, is located in Manitou Springs, Colorado. It's the little hippie town that's right at the foot of Pikes Peak. And it is, if you drive into town, you'll see right away, everybody's going to try to help you with your anxiety. There's a mindfulness clinic. There is a tarot card reader. There's all, the hypnosis, all of these little things, crystal shops, or potions. You can have potions mixed up to do spells or whatever. And in a way, it's super significant that our ministry is located there because we're not escaping from a culture that is like that. We're going to engage it. But what do you think about all those different people, all those different approaches, and what's not working, and why we should pay attention to what Jesus wants us to do?
Yeah, it's it's all around us, right? And so it's the self-help books, and which technically mine is. It is all of the mindfulness podcasts and YouTube videos. And again, it speaks to a culture that's hurting, right? I
Hmm.
mean, where there's a need, people will want to try and fill that need and provide ways for it. And some people want to make money off of it. And so stepping back and recognizing it shows a greater need. And I think what, culture is doing what it's going to do without a God, without our God, right? It's going to find earthly ways to solve what it believes to be earthly problems. Um,
Okay.
and
Yep.
and and so you kind of can't blame them, really, right? Because everybody wants to scramble to try and fix a problem, and so they're going to do it in the best way that they know how, in the ways that they've been given. And I think what obviously falls short is they are not able to tap into the creator of our universe.
Right.
And my hope with anyone who wants to overcome anxiety, depression, addictions, whatever, is that as they engage with whatever treatment they're using, whether it be medicinal, mental health, therapy, anything along those lines, is that to recognize and step back that whatever help you've been given has been given to you by God, and that obviously he could take it away, but that's not even the point. The point is that if he can provide that, he needs to be a part of that healing journey as well. Because if I'm missing this connection with him, I'm missing we talked about connections earlier. I'm missing the most important connection in my life. That is the only one that can provide foundation for everything I'm doing. All of those other things are on top of what I reference as the doc in the end of my book. And it's just analogy that, our doc can be built on various things of life that in some cultures actually make a dock look like it's standing well.
Hmm.
But those things that it's standing on are the beams underneath. And if your dock is built on wooden beams, it's not going to withstand every storm. Really, what we need are steel beams.
Yeah.
And so the wooden beams are the things of life that we come to depend on. And sometimes it's the crystals, or, the tarot cards, or even our own success, our knowledge of the Bible, our marriage, and but none of those are God. And so our doc needs to be built on who he is, his faithfulness, his love for us, his truth. And then everything else, some of it's still good stuff, some of it, right? And so we can put that on top of the doc. But at the end of the day, we have to build that connection with him, because future storms are going to come to all of us, even therapists.
Yes.
And if it's not built on that doc, if I've slowly started to put my dependency on, say, my abilities as a therapist, right, that can crumble at any moment. That is not a for sure thing. I don't get this guarantee that I'm always going to be a therapist and be able to depend on my insights or my wisdom. That can go at any second. So
Wow.
even I have to build that doc on who he is and his truth, so that when those storms come to me, I can stand on that doc that is built on who he is. I think that's what they're missing. I know that's what they're missing.
Yeah. Yeah. I can completely see that. On the positive side, as you mentioned, people they're motivated to come up with solutions. That's a good thing
Mm-hmm.
for people to
Mm-hmm.
try to solve problems.
Mm-hmm.
It's also good that people recognize they have a brokenness and
Mm-hmm.
they want to do something about it. And it's also maybe helpful, and this is what you see in a town like Manitou Springs that you might not see in other places. It's very spiritual. People do recognize that the battle that they're facing is a spiritual one, not just a physical one. So
Mm-hmm.
all of those things are going in the right direction, but they aren't going to saying that I have a spiritual problem and the universe is not working in my favor right now is very different than saying there is a triune God who made me in his image. And that's where I'm going to begin my work.
It is very different. I lived in Las Vegas for about a dozen years, and so it's a very different atmosphere there, where I think a lot of people recognize the brokenness, they just don't care. It's a different aspect of things.
Yeah.
And so learning how to be a Christian counselor in Sin City has its own unique,
Wow.
pourings into who I am as a therapist, and I'm very grateful for that. But in a town like that, it's just a broken area, and there are a lot of broken people, and it's a more obvious broken, and so it's a little easier to pinpoint things. But if you're in Manitou Springs, or even I know there's parts of Arizona that are similar, where it's a highly spiritual area, where like in Sedona and stuff. So you've got these spaces where people think that they've got those answers, and that's really hard because to present to them a God that is different than what they believe in feels like you're just wanting to push out what they believe and bring in what you believe, even though it's less about what you believe and more about trying to give them the hope of something purely foundational. And
Yeah. And
I think that's a lot harder.
I think you're right. And I think in many ways, you think of a place like Sedona, which is beautiful and you can go for nice hikes and everybody's very calm. But their circumstances are perfect. They live in this really well put together, clean, neat, orderly little
Mm-hmm.
town. This is
Mm-hmm.
not going to help people who are in Ukraine right now who know that a drone could hit their house
Yep.
and their family could die. It seems like a biblical view is focused on peace in the storm, not peace because the storm is at bay.
Well, yeah. So what you're talking about, like with Sedona, say, or any other um, first world upper class, middle to upper class area, is that those are their wooden beams,
Hmm.
right? They built their dock on the wooden beams of success or finances or a safe place to live. And so it's all a facade because at any time that storm can be bigger, we just aren't faced with a storm as often in first world countries as people are in either war torn countries or third world countries. Their docks that get built as they become believers tend to be built on those steel beams quicker than ours do because we have the resources to have wooden beams.
Wow. Okay. This is so good. When you and I were talking just briefly before the show, and Justin, one of our producers, was on. He said you should share this story. So I thought maybe this might be a time to just share it. At Summit Ministries, we kind of went through this. You mentioned COVID as a sort of a point of where anxiety really spiked. And
Mm-hmm.
it seems to be there are a lot of reasons for that. One of them I just learned this morning, actually, because we had another podcast with a guy named Dr. Gary Chapman, who's just this wise mentor, teaches on the 5 love languages. And he helped me understand something I didn't grasp before. And maybe we can get into it. But I remember this time, it was 2 years after COVID. We had restarted our in-person programs in Colorado. We had to go outside the state for a while just because of our state's policies.
Mm-hmm.
We restarted the programs in Colorado. I thought the summer was going really well. It was hard. We had some illnesses that came as when you gather people together and they hadn't been together for a while. It's not COVID. It's just all kinds of
Mm-hmm.
stuff, colds, whatever. And so people were kind of dragged down. And I remember the directors of our program calling me saying, "Can we meet?" These are 4, Melissa, of the toughest people I have ever known. Their capacity is enormous. They face problems, they solve problems, they make the summit experience awesome for the students, but in many times they're in many ways they're doing it at great personal cost, but they're tough. They're really tough people.
Mm-hmm.
They called this meeting together. Everybody in the room was sobbing for the
Mm-hmm.
toughest people I've ever met. And they said, "We just can't go on like this." And they said the issues the students are dealing with are so much bigger than they've ever been. Their incapacity to deal with them seems so much higher. The way they're acting out is so bizarre.
Mm-hmm.
And we're talking about mostly leadership kids, mostly kids who've been raised in a Christian home. These are not kids whose environment growing up was highly traumatic for the most
Mm-hmm.
part, but it was horrible. And 4 of the toughest people I've ever known in my life said, "We can't go on." Well, that's a huge wake up call. So we started to do a number of different things differently. And I think I now understand why some of these things really worked so well. First of all, we just brought in more support for the summer staff. So now we have at least two couples who are with us all of the time, sort of grandparent type couples, and they are mentors to the summer staffers. So they're not taking the load of work off of these young
Mm-hmm.
mentors who are working with students who are having a hard time. They're increasing their capacity.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes their message is very simple, chin up, you can do this, it's going to be okay, just keep going, that kind of a thing. The staff mentors was a huge part of it. Therapy ended up being a huge part of this. Now, we obviously don't advertise to our students that we have therapists because they'll all want to meet and talk about, I just like
Now they know.
now that's right. Now it's been revealed. But what I don't want is for people to forfeit their sense of agency just because there's a
Mm-hmm.
professional in the room.
Mm-hmm.
But if they need help, then we have people available there to help them.
Mm-hmm.
Even having dogs on the
Mm-hmm.
property. These three golden retrievers, and they work really hard too. They can only work a day, and then they have to take a couple of days off. So there are three of them,
Mm-hmm.
and they cycle. But they were there. They reached kids who couldn't
Mm-hmm.
otherwise be reached, just because there's
Mm-hmm.
something about laying down on the floor next to a dog who accepts you unconditionally that helps you open up. But I wonder if some of what really ended up working was that mindset shift to, okay, we're not going to remove from you the burdens that you face. We're just going to be alongside of you as you face those burdens. I wonder if that may have been some of what really made the difference, because the difference is unbelievable. People who come to our programs, like I said, they're already leadership oriented and so forth. They don't have fewer issues, but our capacity to deal with them is greater. And then maybe something else, and I just love to hear your thoughts on this, is this: we began to help people turn the mindset from what we're going to do for them to what we're going to ask them to do for others. In other words, give what you hope to receive. We're gonna ask you, if you say I don't have any friends, well then we're gonna ask you to be a friend to other people. And then as you give what you hope to receive, then you are focused on enriching the lives of other people. Then you begin to receive. And it's a biblical principle.
Mm-hmm.
But I hadn't really thought about it till we had our conversation with Dr. Gary Chapman, that might have been a significant part of what's going on. So
A
anyway, I'd
happy
love to hear your
accident.
thoughts, because it's been quite a journey, and it's, a lot of new staff people, a lot of new things, and just trying to figure out what works, because we want students' hearts and souls and minds to be ministered to in the deepest way possible.
Yeah, I love that. I love that I had said this earlier, but that you guys took such quick action to bring in support and bring in help in a variety of different ways. And I think there are a few key things that you guys did without realizing it. And I'm going to go back to the earlier part of our conversation about community and connection, and asynchronous versus synchronous, and lean into that synchronous, meaning lean into that community aspect. Um, when the shutdowns first happened, many of us therapists immediately went, "Oh no," because we intuitively know what it looks like for people to not have community. It's a part of most of us. For a part of our intake assessments is you're assessing biopsychosocial, spiritual, what's going on with them biologically, genetics, everything, chemicals, whether meds, food, all of that, exercise, psychologically, how are they mentally, what are they thinking about, what are they engaging with that involves their mind, socially, who's in their social environment, what's happening in their social environment, and then spiritual, if they have that. Well, we're all spiritual beings, but if they have a relationship with God, addressing that as well. And that social piece right there is so important, because in a first assessment with somebody, if I'm sitting down with a client and I get to that piece and I'm asking, who's in your support system, who do you have, and they say, I don't need anyone, I have my dog.
Mm.
No, I love dogs. I'm with you. I would be with that golden retriever on the ground. um, but I instinctively know this is going to be a long journey, because if they don't have anybody else in their life that they're communicating with on a consistent basis and having, connection with, it's going to make their therapy journey longer, which is fine, but it's going to make their process that much harder.
Mm.
Because my clients who then say, "Oh, well, man, my best friend, she's so great. And my sister and I, we talk daily. And my mom, I wish you could see more often, but she lives 2 states away. But we talk as much as we can. It's a little bit of a whew, from
Yes.
my seat, because I know that this process is likely to be a fraction of what it could be, because they have the support to encourage them in between our sessions. They have the other people in their lives giving them that feedback.
Right.
It is so important. It is vital to us to have that interaction. And so when those shutdowns happened, I remember thinking, I give it about 9 months, 7 to 9 months before we see a mass increase in depression and anxiety. And I think it was about 9 months later when I read a report, highest number of SSRIs being currently prescribed in the United
Oh,
States.
man.
And I went, yep, it's the natural consequence of isolation. I think it's Sue Johnson who says that isolation is inherently traumatizing
Hmm.
to a nervous system. And so now you take your leaders and they've been through a lot, as everybody has, right? And they've been isolated a lot, as everybody has. So all of us at that point have a reduced capacity. All of us, because now we've essentially, I'm going to use the word traumatized very minimally, but we've essentially activated our sympathetic nervous system over and over and over again by not getting that engagement. And so, since we haven't been fed in those ways, we have less to pour out to others. And so, by you bringing in those mentors, who are just there to come alongside them, you're
Mm.
doing great. You know
Mm.
what? Yeah, let's process this together. Let's brainstorm this together. You know what? I think you've got that one. Good job. How powerful is that for another human being to say that to you?
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
think that piece right there was probably the biggest part, is giving them connection.
Mm. Yeah, that makes so much sense. I really appreciate the way you've framed that. Well, we feel like it was a blessing to be in that position. As we look back at it now, it was
Mm-hmm.
horrible at the time. I felt like a failure. I felt like I had let
Mm-hmm.
these were people who I'm their leader, and I felt like I let them down by putting too much work on their shoulders. We didn't understand at the time what you
Mm-hmm.
have just expressed, how COVID really affected people at that deep level. It
Mm-hmm.
wasn't just, I remember at the beginning of it, oh, we get to take a few days off and binge watch a few TV shows.
Mm-hmm.
But our souls were not prepared for it.
Mm-hmm.
All of these decades of moving away from a biblical worldview seemed to make the isolation even worse. Just we weren't ready.
Probably,
Yeah.
but I think we just weren't designed for it.
Mm.
He didn't design our brains to be in isolation. So when my husband and I, when he was stationed in Japan, we had this friend who adopted a girl from China and brought her over to Japan. And the girl had been in an orphanage that had cared for all of her basic needs. And she was 2 years old when they adopted her. All of her basic needs were met. She got food, she had safety, she had shelter, warmth, crib, whatever. But they didn't engage with the babies. They didn't really touch them much. They didn't do any
Mm.
of those interactive things that parents might do. So when they got this girl at 2 years old, she could not sit up, she could not eat on her own, she could not talk.
Wow.
What we would consider to be basic milestones, like if we're providing basic needs, you should just be able to do these things, right?
Mm-hmm.
And within the first 6 months to a year, she started walking with my friend. She started walking, wasn't even sitting up. She was walking, talking, and eating,
Mm.
because that's what a normal 2 year old does. And so recognizing that those interactions that she was lacking in her childhood were that important, that it actually caused her to not develop the way we would consider to be normal, because we're not designed to be without that interaction. So yeah, we have all these previous years of not really walking in biblical walks, maybe before COVID, and our world hasn't been that way. But even if we had, we weren't designed to be in isolation,
Yeah.
which is why your leaders, who you consider to be strong people with great capacity, who you knew were following God, still struggled because their brains weren't designed to have that
Mm.
isolation.
Yeah. Wow. This has been such a great conversation, talking with Melissa Fisher about anxiety. The book that Melissa wrote is called Jesus for the Anxious. And I'd be really curious, as we maybe kind of the last question as we wrap things up here. It's one thing to think, oh, I have anxiety and I'm going to try to drill down on this problem. But what we really want to be looking for is a life that's increasingly shaped by Jesus.
Hmm.
So it's more, you could probably drive by looking in the rearview mirror and maybe somewhat successfully. You can kind of drive a little bit by looking out the side window. You can kind of drive a little bit by looking right in front of the car, but mostly you got to be having that long distance view to be able to drive straight and true. Tell us what that life, what should we be looking for that kind of a life?
Yeah, I love the way that you phrased that. And it's so important because we do need to look in the rearview mirror at times and the side mirrors at times, and maybe right in front of us. But the long-term solution has to have a long-term vision, right? And Jesus is our forever vision. That's a catchy phrase, right? But if you think of it that way, of He's our forever vision, meaning He's not just our forever, He's our right now and our forever. And so He will guide us through all of those steps, whether it be the ones right in front of us, behind us, beside us, or much distant in the future. And I said something earlier in that, we don't get to avoid life storms. And so overcoming anxiety does not mean you will never experience anxiety again. So here's the bad news for all of your listeners. Overcoming anxiety does not mean you will never experience anxiety again. What it does mean is that you will handle future storms differently than you do now, with more capacity, with more wisdom, with more tools. And much more importantly, you will have all those tools ready for you, and you will have this foundation of being with Jesus. And by the way, He's with you now, even when you don't realize it. But this foundation of having walked with Him all the steps between now and, say, a future storm, you won't even question it. It will be so core to what you've been doing for all these months that you'll get into this future storm. You'll be like, this sucks, Jesus. But you'll say Jesus.
Yeah.
Because you will have been walking with Him, and you'll be like, oh, I just know He's with me. I don't have to think about it anymore. And He's got me right here. Yes, we're standing on this dock, but it's on His steel beams. And yes, the storm literally just wiped everything off the top of the dock that I've been working on. And sometimes those things are really good things, like your marriage, maybe a good career, maybe a ministry even. But none of those things is what we're supposed to stand on. And so when you get to that storm, you're going to instinctively know He's with you, and that will change your entire being, perspective, your just way of entering it and exiting it. It will be different.
This has been such an amazing conversation, Melissa. I'm really thankful for your coming on the show. I just love the way that we can, I'm curious about all of these things myself, and so I just like to ask questions of people, but recognizing that a biblical worldview brings the solutions to the deepest problems of our hearts, as well as the ones that we face in our culture. I think I feel better equipped to be one who trusts in Jesus, and also to help other people turn to Him in that same way. So thank you for your time today.
Thank you, Dr. Myers. I appreciate you having me on.
Thank you to my guest, Melissa Fisher, for coming on the show today. You can go to melissafishercounseling.com to find more of her resources and find more about this resource we talked about on the show, Jesus for the Anxious. As you know, this podcast is a resource of Summit Ministries, and we are equipping and supporting the rising generation to embrace God's truth and champion a biblical worldview. As we record this, we have summer sessions going on around the country right now, 12 days long, where young adults are sitting with top Christian worldview thought leaders of our day, learning to embrace God's truth, figuring out how they can be leaders who will make a difference in the culture. If that kind of a program or any of the other resources that we offer can be helpful to you, you are welcome to them. Just go to summit.org. Let's connect. Let's start our journey together. Thank you so much for joining the show today. We'll see you next week.